I'm going to turn to Ashley now just to hear her story. And Ashley, just take it away. It's such a remarkable story.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Alyssa, for having me on. And it's good to meet Laura too. It's good to have another mom who knows that journey. So
yes, likewise.
Yeah. Thank you. So my journey began, and I was pregnant with. We had miscarried our first baby, and I was pregnant with our second. And we found out at 18 weeks in utero that Levi, our little Levi, had what was called holoprosencephaly. And so it's a diagnosis where the lobes of the brain are fused, and a lot of the midline structures are missing or compromised. So basically, like the motherboard of your body that helps it to function was just all sorts mixed up. And so basically what that meant for him is that they gave him about a 3% chance of survival and just basically said he probably won't make this.
You said 3% chance of survival.
Exactly. Right? Yep. Okay. He had about a 3% chance to survive. Okay. So the deck was very much stacked against my little man. And it's interesting because as I've gone through the journey, I've found that so many women get this diagnosis, whatever it is. I mean, they're all scary. And you get this diagnosis, and I think it's so easy. I think Satan moves in when he knows that God has something really great in store for us.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens to everybody, regardless of where you're at in your faith journey. And he did that as well to me. And, you have the doctors that approach you and say, oh, here are your options, and so on and so forth. And I think it's interesting because, even as Jesus died on the cross and he was hanging there, and Satan knew that there was a reward there as well, and he begged Christ, come off the cross. If you are really God, come off the cross and save yourself. And I think he does that in a way to all of us mothers who are facing that. They see what these beautiful children can bring to the world, and he puts in our mind that you can't do that, and your life is going to be miserable, and all of these things. But I think we know, Laura and myself, going through this, that it's the most beautiful journey to live through. And so Levi was born, and he had a strong heartbeat and strong lungs, and went right to the NICU, and he was there for 18 days. And then he just had a really rough 5.5 years. It was up and it was down, and it was constantly a bag was packed, and we never knew if we were in the intensive care unit that night. Like, he was just, he was so fragile. He couldn't walk. He couldn't talk. He required numerous interventions, feeding tube and colostomy and IV nutrition and all sorts of just things. But through the whole experience, my Levi just loved to live, and he loved being a part of the family. He loved, he just had such a love for life.
I think that when you say this, I picture the pictures that I have seen of him.
Yes.
And you're not kidding that he loved to live.
It radiates from him, doesn't it?
In still photos, this crazy zest for life.
Yeah. Yes.
He was a champion of life. He was just there. I'm here to climb this mountain of life.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was just worth it to him. And I wish I could instill that in every heart. Just the awe of the beauty of life is just incredible. He fought so hard for it. He couldn't walk, couldn't talk, non-mobile, non-verbal, relied on me for every ounce of everything that he got, fluid, nutrition, everything. He was just so dependent, but it just didn't matter. He knew what it meant to live and to be around people that he loved. And I just wish everybody could experience that. It's just
absolutely
beautiful.
Well, do you mind if we just go back to when you heard the diagnosis? And you mentioned that the doctor said your option, but the option that, if I am right, the option they were pushing was encouraging you to have an abortion. Is that right?
Say that again. I'm sorry, Alyssa.
The option that they were giving you was to have an abortion.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. They basically said, along the lines as I was telling you, as every mother hears when they have a diagnosis in front of them, just, let's try again, maybe next time it'll be better. And, they give you people have heard all of these lovely reasons why we should abort.
Right.
And I just instinctively, obviously said absolutely not. And
right.
for me, it was just kind of like, at what point does it give a mother, do I as a mother have a choice of when this is okay to abort? It just baffled me. It's like, when does the impairment become so great that it's okay? Because, in the eyes of everyone, okay, so having glasses could be an impairment. Hearing, that's an impairment. Is it cerebral palsy? Well, that's an impairment. You know what I'm saying? So it's just kind of like, really, aren't we all impaired in some capacity? Who draws the line as to when it's too much or when we can't handle it?
And, I think that idea
it's interesting. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that idea of, well, you could try again and maybe next time you'll have better luck. I always think to people, we aren't making waffles here. The first waffle you always throw away because it's stuck to the griddle. But we aren't making waffles. These are lives.
Yeah.
Right.
Can
I interject something,
away,
Alyssa?
Not the first baby. What?
Can I interject something?
Yes, please, Laura.
As you were sharing that, Ashley, I was thinking, too, I've had so many people ask me, did you know about Isaiah's condition when you were pregnant with him?
Oh, yeah.
And my answer is no, and I'm really glad that I didn't, because I think I would have been very nervous during delivery. But then the next question is, well, what difference would it have made?
Right.
But everybody wants to know that. Did you know, when you were pregnant? Well,
yes,
no.
You're right.
Right.
Yes.
And as if you can cure Down syndrome through abortion, this is wild that the society thinks they can do that. What would you have done differently?
Yeah.
Nothing. Except for maybe being nervous during the delivery.
Right.
Amazing. Well, okay, now, Ashley, on to, you also told me when you were deciding, yes, I'm going to have this child, that they told you, well, you better just pick out a casket right away. And how was that as a mom to hear that? What was that like?
To hear that I was facing such odds?
Yes.
Is that the question? Yeah, yes. It was very scary. It was very scary. And I think a lot of your support kind of just dies, really. I mean, your mother, your grandmother, your friends, suddenly all that support that was there for you before kind of goes to the wayside. It really does. And because they've never been through it, they can't offer you really any help, any assistance, I've been there for you. That goes away. And I think that's kind of that's something that a lot of people don't really talk about, is that there's not there's support if you go out and look for it. But right at that moment when you hear that diagnosis and you share it with your family, they don't even know how to respond to you. And so the night that I got the diagnosis for Levi, I called my mom and my dad, and of course they were speechless, and Josh, my husband, of course, and I were both just, beside ourselves and scared. And so the only thing that I knew how to do, which I learned from my parents, which was just instrumental in my life, was to give it to God, to just give it to God. And there was a reason that you are facing this, kind of like Laura said, there's a reason that you face all of these things. And I went to adoration, and I just fell before Christ in tears, and I just said, Lord, I need a miracle. And if a miracle is not your will, then just give me the strength to get through this. And that was my prayer. I just lifted it all up to God. And that had become kind of my anthem throughout. It was just everything, whether we were in the, Ashley, Levi's not going to make it tonight. We're in the PICU or in the, in the trenches trying to save him. I was always like, God, give me the strength to get through this. And it was interesting because my prayer throughout Levi's life, and just a big change for me, was that I found that my prayer life had changed because I wasn't necessarily asking beyond that point for certain outcomes. It wasn't like, oh, Lord, just get me, I really need this today. I always just prayed for strength.
Wow. Because
ultimately what God was going to have happen was his to decide. And I just wanted to be an instrument to him, and I just wanted to be able to praise him in whatever that would be. And so Levi has changed my life and has changed my prayer life very much in that regard, to just like, Lord, let it happen, and just keep me hanging on.
Right, exactly.
Keep me fighting with you.
You often hear people saying, I could never do that. And maybe even at the 18-week, how many women have said, well, I could never take care of a child like this, so all right, if you want to abort. But I'm guessing that in your own life you would think from here or there, before you ever had children or whenever, you thought, boy, I could never do that. But what do you have to say about those thoughts and how that changes when you are given the situation?
Yeah, absolutely. It's daunting. It is definitely daunting. I can't discredit that because it's a big, it's a tall order. There's no doubt. And you just don't know. It's the unknown, I think, that people are so fearful of. But unfortunately, I think in today's day and age, Alyssa, so few people put their trust fully in God. And that is the true tragedy in all of it. Because when they say that they can't get through it, it's just disheartening because God gave this to you, and with Him and through Him you can do all things. And so it really speaks to just kind of where we're at in society today. And I think there's no doubt there's a lot of suffering that goes with that. There was a lot of suffering that Levi endured, and I have to tell you, it's very painful as a parent to watch that. I watched him suffer through intubations and crying and surgeries, and I never left his side, holding his hand through the whole time as he was seizing. And, I was pushing IV fluids and hoping that, that I would just have him for one more day. I lived through that for 5.5 years. And I think it's interesting because it's not easy. It's not easy. But when I nail my pain and my suffering to Christ on the cross with Him, it wasn't easy for Him either. But he knew the reward, right? Like Christ knew that there was the reward in that suffering. And I think the world would like us to believe that suffering is so horrible and that there's, that it's something that we should never have to go through, and it's unfortunate. Satan knows, I think, the power of suffering, and he makes it very easy for us to say no to it. And so the world puts out there that we should just avoid suffering at all costs, and we should just be comfortable and happy and live that perfect life. And I think it's interesting. It's like Pope Benedict had said, we're not made for comfort, we're made for greatness. And I think that's just so key. I just think that's so key. And that suffering and pain, they go away, and they pass away, and it's what we do with those things that are just so powerful, and they truly change the world. So it's daunting, but if you really understand why God gives these things to us, it's just the most beautiful way to unite yourself with Christ. It really is.
Well, that is a perfect way to go into our break. This idea of suffering being able to change the world. And it ties in with everything we're talking about today with the Feast of the Holy Family, the Feast of the Holy Innocents, which your children certainly are those beautiful, innocent children. And so we will come back from break in just a minute with Laura Ryder and Ashley Rickert. I'm your host, Alyssa Bormas, here on Catholic Kaleidoscope here at Radio Maria.
You're listening to Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home. We now return to a rebroadcast of Catholic Kaleidoscope with Alyssa Bormes.
Hi, it's Alyssa Bormes. I'm your host for Catholic Kaleidoscope on Radio Maria. I'm so glad to be here with you today. Merry Christmas in the middle of the octave, and also a happy Feast of the Holy Family, and today being the 28th of December, the Feast of the Holy Innocents. Just to recap, we're talking with Laura Ryther and Ashley Rickard. They're both, well, among many things, but they're moms. That's the most important thing, wives and moms. And they have these beautiful stories about their children who certainly are among the innocents. And we were talking at the break with Ashley and suffering and the idea of suffering having meaning. Now, Ashley, just to sort of tie up your story, as Levi was born, and I think you said they did genetic testing on him or something, and then found that you should never have any more children, is what they were saying. Is that right?
Yes. Yep, exactly that.
And what was the reason they gave that you should never even try?
Yes. So they did some testing and some blood work, and they came back when Levi was in the NICU, and they said, based on these genetic tests, you and your husband face about an 86% chance of having another child like Levi, or perhaps even worse, maybe with no brain at all, or you will probably just miscarry. So just speak to us before you go and plan the rest of your family.
But luckily you didn't exactly listen to their advice. You listened to someone else's advice, your dad.
Yes.
What did your dad tell you?
My dad has always been just such a pillar of strength to me, and he has always been so prayerful. And I looked to my dad, and I just said, Dad, they told me that I will never have a healthy child. And I said, what do I do? And he said, Ashley, he said, look to the church. He said, God will never mislead you. And so I did, and I dug deep into my faith because I needed it to really be my own. This was heavy stuff, and I really wanted to know why I believed it. And so I jumped in and really took hold of my faith, and then we proceeded to move forward after a wonderful, dear priest friend of mine, Father Livingston. He told me, Ashley, he said, live your life in love and never in fear. And that between those two things, we pressed forward and we just said, we love Levi no matter what, and we would take another one of him in a heartbeat.
Right.
And it's interesting. I feel like, when we're given these children, Alyssa, we're given souls, and the bodies are just the messenger. And for some reason, we get so hung up on the body and we lose sight of the soul. And that's kind of the unfortunate thing in all of this. And so when they're saying, don't have any more kids because their bodies might not be right. I mean, right? That's essentially what they said to me, is that their bodies might not be right. And so we give so much credit to that. And mothers and, women all around the world, they think that if it's not a healthy baby, then it's probably just not worth it. And they lose track of the fact that it's the soul that's the gift, and it's the body that's joined with that gift for a short time just to bring it to earth. And so those thoughts really helped me move forward and just said, okay, God, I trust you. You gave me my Levi, and I'm open to life. I'm Catholic. I'm pro-life. Yes. I love my faith, and I love you, and, I trust you. And then we had two babies after that were born perfectly healthy.
It's amazing. And Laura, I know after Isaiah, because he's the third youngest. I was thinking he was the second youngest. But did you have feelings of, maybe we shouldn't try anymore, and maybe this has to do with my age or something? Or what was that for you?
No, we never had those thoughts at all. I remember when I was pregnant with my next daughter, Faith, asking the doctors, like what's the percentage, that we could have another baby with Down syndrome or with heart defects and such. But it was more out of a curiosity. It wasn't I don't want to go there again. It was just, how often does that happen? And it didn't. We have 2 healthy girls as well, and very blessed. You know, as you were talking, Ashley, something that came across my mind, and you mentioned it too, is just the trust. And so many people that say to us, you know, you're so strong, and how do you do this? And I think, man, if you really knew me, I'm not that strong. You know, it is total reliance and total trust in God and His plan. And Jeff and I have a saying, which doesn't necessarily have God in it, but I think we know that it does when we say it. We always say, it is what it is.
Yeah.
It is what it is. This is what God's given us. This is what He wants us to do, and we do it. You just do it.
And I was thinking earlier when Ashley was talking, that when we talk about, well, I could never do that. You're right, you couldn't. That's why you got to rely on God. Because then you can.
Yeah, right. And when you're put in that position, you just do it. You do it with the strength of God, and that's how you get through it. And we've had so many graces and so many blessings, you know, through this journey too, as far as, you know, the support of friends and family and, you know, unexpected gifts showing up that have made our life so much easier, you know, when we're in hospital mode, as we call it. So we've just been very blessed in the whole situation. And
Ashley, you too were in hospital mode for, I don't think we talked yet that Levi died. It was only recently, am I right?
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
Yes, my Levi went to heaven on June 14th of 2014, so just this summer. Mm-hmm.
He probably had racing stripes on to heaven, you know?
Oh, right. I tried to, grab his shirt tails, and I just couldn't quite. Yes.
Hopefully the ultimate handout for all of us, right?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Oh, he was amazing. He is amazing. He continues to work. I just love it.
Yeah. I want to know from both of you, having these children, and then Joshua, Isaiah, Levi, but then having other children, how did Joshua, Isaiah, and Levi, how did they affect your other children? Ashley, why don't you start?
Yes. So my little Gianna wasn't very much younger than my Levi. They were a year apart. And so Gianna grew up knowing what it was like to grab Mama's syringe to go and feed her brother. And she was, 4 when she had just turned 4 when he had passed away. So it was really only 3 years. And then, of course, my Bennett was quite a bit smaller. He was 1, so he wasn't touched as much in that short amount of time. But my Gianna is so compassionate toward everyone and just doesn't see disability. It is such a beautiful thing, and I'm sure Laura can attest to that too. Mm-hmm. It's just what they know, and so they don't have to get past that barrier of like, oh, that guy's different, that kiddo's different.
Right.
They are who they are, and they just love them for that. So it is a gift.
Fantastic, Laura. How about your kids?
I would say the same thing as far as, not seeing the disability. And we're pretty fortunate to be in a school district where, the integration and the immersion in the classroom is pretty widespread. So my kids see it every day. And I remember my oldest in her kindergarten class, one of her classmates, had disabilities, was using a wheelchair, and she sort of attached herself to him on the very first day and just kind of took him under her wing. And she was, I attested that to, they just don't see, and that was even before I was born, so I can't even say it was Isaiah.
Wow.
But they've always just kind of had that understanding that everyone has great dignity. And that even helped when Isaiah was born too. It just wasn't an issue. It just that's how he is. That's who he is. I remember I found out that he had Down syndrome in the hospital and by myself, and then called Jeff and told him. And he was in the car bringing the 2 oldest girls to the hospital to see the baby. Mm-hmm. So he said, "Well, let's tell them when we get to the hospital." So they all come in the room, and they're looking at Isaiah, and Jeff and I start to tell Trinity and Rebecca that he has Down syndrome. And their reaction, they literally got up, were jumping up and down, clapping their hands. They were so excited. They're like, "Oh, he's going to be just like, so-and-so, and they rattled off all these names of kids they knew at school, and it's going to be so great, and he's going to do this and this. Something, I don't know if I would have reacted that way as a child. We grew up in such a different time, but so they've just always been very accepting.
And the kids teach you.
Yes. It taught me a lot. I grew up with an uncle that had Down syndrome, and I remember being very frightened. We'd go to visit him at the home that he stayed at, and there were other people there with disabilities, and it was a frightening experience for me as a child.
Right.
And I think that our culture is, well, I don't know if our culture has, but that's been eliminated, at least in my children's life,
right.
that they just don't have that fear, and I'm so thankful for that.
Beautiful. And I'm thinking of your oldest daughter going to kindergarten and befriending this child in a wheelchair. What a gift that must have been to his parents.
Yeah.
Amazing. And with your Gianna, Ashley, I'm thinking as she is meeting other children who maybe have disabilities or who may be afraid of someone with disabilities, her sort of charging in has got to be a great lesson to everyone around her.
Yes. It's interesting because I think living in our family, I think you're kind of wise beyond your years, or at least where you should be, having experienced so much.
Right.
And I remember driving to the cemetery one day to just place a little marker before we got his headstone. I put a little marker with his name on it right on his plot. And I was just kind of tearing up a little bit. It was kind of emotional, and she was in the back seat, and I said, well, she said, what are you doing? And I said, well, we're just going to go put this, give this to Levi in the cemetery. And she said, well, Mom, don't cry. Levi's not there. We're just giving it to his body, and his soul is with Jesus in heaven. And she talks like that, as plain as day, to people in her preschool class, to her teachers. And the fact that her brother is in heaven is just part of her day. And so it's, I think it keeps you yearning for what's after this life. It keeps you focused, and it lets people know that you're, that you're living with purpose, I think. So it's beautiful.
Well, and I think as parents, I am listening to the two of you thinking, the two of you are living with mystics, that these kids, because of their understanding of life and death, and that life is something we fight for, and death, when it comes, is something that we accept, but we know there's something right beyond it. That's the thing, is that there's something right beyond it, and that it's mystical. And I just think you must be blown away that you are in charge of these little mystics, in a sense. Beautiful. Then also, when you mentioned stopping at the cemetery, I don't know why these things don't cross my mind, that of course you would do that. So with you, Laura, having Joshua right there in the cemetery, do you take your kids and it's just part of it all? Do you stop by on a birthday or just someday? How does that work?
My kids are much better about it than I am. I feel like every time we're at church, they say, can we go see Joshua in the cemetery? Sure, go down there. And I think they visit his grave sometimes even more than I am able to or do. There's some days, during work that I'll go down there. I have to admit, I've never been a big graveside person.
Right.
Yes, I respect the dignity of the body, but it's that same feeling of, the soul's in heaven, and he's with me all the time, and I'm not as connected to the spot. But it's definitely good for my kids to see that spot. And we had a baby that we miscarried in between Isaiah and Faith, and again, a miracle, perfectly formed little child who we named Gianna also. And we buried her right under Joshua's stone as well. So they're both there, and the kids, go down there, and we pray to Joshua and Gianna every night and ask for their intercession, knowing that they're watching over us and with us.
It's so beautiful. And keeping their memory alive in your home. And,
right.
Ashley, how do you keep Levi alive in your home?
You're going to make me tear up. Yes. It's difficult to live your life after you're given 24-hour care to your son, and to suddenly one day wake up and not have him there is a really hard thing to then try to pick up the pieces and live your life. And so one of the things that just really helps me get through is kind of just like Laura said. It's just like you know that he's there, but you look up and you know that he's there in heaven. And so I find that when I let my spiritual motherhood lead the way, I'm okay, and I stay focused, and heaven is beautiful, and I envision my son there, and it's perfect. And when I let my earthly motherhood take over, I feel loss, I feel emptiness, why me, all of these things, and I kind of I soothe those things with doing things in memory of him every single day. So just like I take care of Gianna, just like I take care of my Bennett, I try to think of some way that I can honor my Levi that day. And I don't care if it's, it might be going to Mass. Wonderful. Right. It might be reaching out and finding how I can reach out to a different organization and help somebody, or give somebody some money that might be in need, or something like that. But I try to do something every day to honor him.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I love that you talked about the spiritual motherhood and this earthly motherhood. And I think of Mary, of course, in all this, as we're speaking of the Holy Family today, as Mary just sort of taking over in the spiritual motherhood, and then when you want to grab control back in the earthly parts. Now, I know that, Ashley, when I heard you speak one time, you said that probably for those 5 years you never slept through a single night, or had really no sleep. And I think this goes into the part of I could never do that, but then in the midst of it you can. How is it that you are able to function with so little sleep, with so much stress? How do you get all those things pulled together? And then now you're having other children and able to take care of them in the midst of all of it.
Yeah. Well, it was not a day at a time, but a moment at a time, I think. But it was really just, you just get through it. And my husband and I always knew that Levi had a greater purpose. And these kids don't ask for these bodies. They don't ask to be in these situations, but they so gracefully accept and live with these things. And so if the whole world is stacked against my son, I felt like how could I for a moment be selfish in it? It was just kind of like if he was awake, I was awake, and I was going to fight that battle right alongside of him no matter what. Yeah. And it was interesting because I was after, I think it was about a 30-day stay in the PICU. My son had lost about half of his bowel, and we were on our way home, and I knew that he was sick again after I brought him home. And so I was so depleted, but knew that he had to go back up to the hospital, and I drove up an hour to get there. And I just remember crying, and he was in the back seat, and I was crying, and he was crying, and I just said, God, I said, what more do you want from me? I said, I have done this. I have lived, I've lived in the hospital. Levi's been through so much pain. Why do we need to be back in this place? And it's their Holy Spirit moments, and I can't chalk them up to anything but that. And this voice came over me, and this peace came over me, and I remember exactly where I was on the road. And this voice said to me, Ashley, there's no one better to care for your son than me. But until I call him home, there's no one better to care for him than you. And and then this peace came over me. And I said, okay, I can do this. It's like God is asking this of me and of Levi, and I rise to the cause, and God be glorified in it. And it was beautiful, Alyssa, because I was at the Children's Hospital in St. Paul, and they were amazing people and amazing doctors that saw Levi for the boy that he was inside, the soul. And I think the undying love that I gave to my son, regardless, I never left his side once. I showered down the hall. I never left him ever. And nurses saw that, and doctors saw that, and they saw the beautiful love that radiated from Levi and the love that I gave him because I saw the soul. And I think it just, it changed the hospital. It really did. I really believe that. Levi touched surgeons and doctors, and they came pouring into his funeral. The chief of staff was at the hospital, at the wake. It doesn't matter if you don't have a voice. It doesn't matter if you can't walk. These people, these babies, these littlest ones among us are teachers.
It's so beautiful. Laura, we're hitting the end of the program. Ashley's made me cry. You might as well go ahead as well. And you have, this whole time I keep choking up, but now the tears are going. Anyway, what is the love, the soul? What is it, like the lesson, and what has Joshua's life, Isaiah's life, how have they taught complete strangers?
How have they taught
complete strangers?
How have they taught me strength?
Yeah, no, how have they taught other people, just complete strangers? What's the impact they've made in their life?
Well, I have to piggyback on what you were saying, Ashley, the exact same thing about the impact that we noticed that we're making on the staff we're at Children's Hospital in Minneapolis so often. And, some of the faith conversations that we've been able to have with nurses and doctors and surgeons, because we've built this 5-year relationship with them, and we're able to talk about things, that they wouldn't be able to talk about with their other patients necessarily. Mm-hmm. And I think what a great evangelization opportunity. And even when Isaiah was first born, I remember Jeff and I saying, if Isaiah's only purpose in life, it's that he has brought so many people to their knees, people who we know, weren't necessarily, great practicers in their faith or whatever, or people that we knew, perhaps didn't pray that often. We're now praying for him. And if he was going to bring people to Christ like that, what more can you ask for?
It's remarkable. Well, I have to thank you both for being on. You today, the Feast of the Holy Family, you're living that out. And the Feast of the Holy Innocents, and these beautiful, innocent children that you've had, and that you're such beautiful stewards of their souls and their bodies, but their souls. You've been here today with us on Catholic Kaleidoscope. It's been a great joy for me to be with Laura Ryther and Ashley Rickards.